We're talking percentages, because that's the key thing, because of the numbers clearly are going up because of the direction of travel that the government is doing by putting people through TAF. So it's the percentage one which is crucial. Would it be possible for the department to supply the committee with, say, percentages now compared to 12 months ago? Because Harrington's had about 7-8 months to bed in. In theory, that if you're able to do that, we'd be able to tell whether it's gone up or down.
So the only reason I'm being cautious about quoting a number now is because I want to be absolutely sure we get the right figures. So let us do that.
Yes,
but
please.
I mean, if you're going to ask me, are they just rubber stamping? The only calculation I can do is to do something about the way I've just described it now. I understand that it has changed, but you know,
but it may be that some of your decision makers would actually want more to change than are actually changing. There might be more changing than there was previously.
Okay,
but they are absolutely going with the answers.
But they are the decision makers, right? And so everything we are trying to say, everything Professor Harrington has said is you are the decision makers, right? It is not a recommendation, and you know, we're not outsourcing the decision to our. We've asked them to run a test, which even Professor Harrington said is the right test. So we're scoring this up, but then he's simply saying, please will you just stand back, read it carefully and think what you actually want to make by a decision. So if lots of my staff think they would wish it to be different, we have it in their gift to them to actually make it so. Right,
okay. We've got a number of questions here, but they're terribly important. Statistics on WCA outcomes, public, which is a crucial bit because the whole area where we're all waiting for statistics in Parliament. Publications of up-to-date stats on the outcome of IB reassessments, if I can take that first, as opposed to new ESA claims, has been delayed since July because of problems in ensuring their accuracy. What are those problems, and when do you expect the DWP to publish those statistics? This is ESA-IB.
Okay, so I've come in just about every number you would like on ESA, but not on IBR. So I don't know is the answer. Can I drop you a line?
Come back to me on that. I've got others, but that is important.
Why were the ones pulled in July? What was the reason?
I don't know. So, sorry, this is the part of my preparation which I haven't picked up on. So I've gone through all the ESA stuff, but I hadn't picked up a difference in the IBR stuff.
If you would, please. What I'd like to do, Chair, if that's all right, is go to the appeals and then we'll come back to that. Okay. The next thing is appeals, which is down to stats again. We're all aware of the changes with Professor Harrington's report, of which I have to say I was broadly very supportive and live in the earnest hope that the number of appeals, successful appeals, depending on how you define success, but you know, appeals that have gone into a tribunal and the customer has succeeded and the original judgment, whatever the word is overturned, we will know whether Harrington's changes are beginning to show an improvement, I would posit, if that number of appeals starts going down from the shockingly high successful appeals from shockingly high 40% that it was. When we took evidence from the Minister for Employment in March last year, which was Chris Grayling, he said it was too early to tell whether the implementation of Professor Harrington's recommendations are having an impact on the high level of successful appeals. Are you able to update us on the situation now, and when are you anticipating that the figures will be released in the public domain?
Generally speaking, as a department, we're pretty good on management information, and my colleagues just won an award from the Institute for Government for their work on unit costing in particular. But when it comes to appeals, one of the things that bedevils it, I'm afraid, is actually being able to track cohort data. So I know lots of information about what's happening in ATOS and what's happening in the department and what happens in the court service, but stitching that together and saying, oh, that particular one, you know, it came before Harrington Part 1 or before these changes, is actually quite difficult. So it's really quite hard to give you an answer to say, actually, I know that by a certain date this will wash through the system, because at the minute it's almost as if I've got 3 different sets of data. But you're right in your assumption that actually if Harrington is successful in what he's doing, then actually that would tend to reduce the number of appeals. But it's only one of many things which are going on here. So, I mean, some of the other things which we're doing here is we are moving to a position where we will require a mandatory reconsideration of anything before it can go to appeal. At the moment, people can, partly because they don't understand the
But
system.
has that been started yet?
I'm sorry?
The mandatory one has been started, has it? I wasn't aware of that.
The mandatory thing is...
Reconsideration or what have you has been started.
So reconsideration, if it's requested, has been in the system for a long time.
Oh, okay.
The change, and I think it's the prospect of change, I don't think it has happened yet, is to say you may not go to the tribunal until you've had it properly reconsidered in order to make sure that the...
And would that be,
claimant...
excuse me interrupting, would that be a paper reconsideration or would the individual have to go through another face-to-face assessment?
Oh no, it's not another face-to-face assessment. This is for another decision maker to look at the evidence, speak to the claimant, and say, look, you've asked me to look at this again. Is there anything else you want to tell me that you haven't already told your predecessors, so that I can reconsider it properly? One of the things which you'll know if you ever go and sit in any of the tribunals is that a large number of the tribunals have the effect of people turning up with evidence we haven't seen previously. Right? So there's something about the process which actually means that actually people are turning up and putting a bit of information in front of the tribunal which has not been put in front of my member of staff.
That's because they're never asked.
Sorry?
They're never asked.
Well, no, with respect, that's has been unfair to the substantial work that people do all the way through this process to try to get it. I mean, you should not assume that everybody is simply delivering everything that might possibly be required at the start. I observe only that there is a lot of new evidence, and also the other thing that happens at tribunals is actually the tribunal makes a different judgment on exactly the same fact. Now, what we need to do is to learn. We need to learn, and this is another part of the process I was trying to give you a concept answer here. Mandatory reconsideration is one step in this. The second thing we're doing, working with the courts, is to understand in much greater clarity than we previously have, why is it that you overturned that decision? What was it? What thought process did you go through, so that we can try to make sure that we have had that thought process before you get to it. That's an important part of developing the appeal story.
Sorry, yes.
Can I just very quickly ask, I mean, as I understand it, it's like a 56, 57-page assessment application form. So presumably a lot of people think in 56 pages, surely I should be providing all the information that is required in that bureaucratic process. So I just put apart that one. The second thing is, I find, can I just understand if I've...
Sorry,
make sure
if they had done that, then the tribunals would not be telling me that people are turning up with new evidence. So whatever the process is...
Of course, they are turning up with new evidence, because the evidence very often costs them money, and if they think they've filled in a form, it will give them all the new evidence. But of course, by the time they go to tribunal, of course they're going to go get their GP or whatever, or their consultant and things. But there's nothing on the ESA 50 form says. In fact, it discourages very often that kind of extra expense to the claimant, because you'd hope the claimant would get through the WCA on both the face-to-face interview and what they've got in the ESA 50.
But for people to go through a face-to-face and not sort of seek to explain what sort of things they thought they might have, I mean, I would hope that
But that's the basic problem of the WCA. That's what everyone keeps telling us about. They'll turn up. Some people will turn up to the WCA with all this documentation, and the assessor doesn't want to see it. The assessor makes assumptions. How did you get here today? And therefore, if they took a bus, therefore they can get a bus every single time for every single journey. There's a myriad of things. You just need to hear individuals' experiences of going through the
I can give you one
WCA.
case from my surgery last week. Was a man with a tumour on his pituitary, where he'd provided consultant's letter to say this is what I'm restricted in able to do, and it was ignored. On top of, as I say, the 56-page application form.
Okay, so let me make some observations. I mean, I'm in no way seeking to deny those experiences, but when you ask me about how the WCA is operating, clearly we're anxious to make sure that actually it's being operated properly and with some quality. So you might ask me, well, what mechanisms by which do I know that? So, this is relevant. So we go through a process of checking what's been happening and then checking the checkers about what's been happening with this to try to establish what sort of level
of quality. with Harrington, the checking the checkers, because
no, I believe that predates Harrington, because I don't think he's made that observation. So just in ordinary contractual practice. So what we're trying to do here is try to establish what level of reports are actually not well done. Okay, and there is a threshold that we've set sort of targets and sort of potential penalties around all of that stuff. But actually, the sort of numbers that are coming out, there's sort of 2-3-4% of these reports are not turning out to the quality that we like.
And that's why, if there's one thing across party that possibly for different reasons, but often for the same reasons, where we are all waiting for the data, is that let's say from the coalition's perspective, it is a challenge when you have 40% successful appeals rates. From the candidate's perspective, it's horrifying, because all of us around the table, or MPs around the table, have constituents who have succeeded in appeals and gone through very stressful processes. We also have people who have failed appeals, perhaps quite rightly. But where I'm coming from, there's so much hyperbole around this issue, so much almost scaremongering in some way, and perhaps and very understandable fear in another. What I need and what we need is we need to know whether it's still 40%, 35%, 55%, 25%. I spoke at a debate only last week, my colleagues did as well, and I think, if I remember rightly, I actually said that if it's still 40% successful rate at appeals, we have a challenge with the Harrington changes. So I do understand there are 2 or 3 changes happening as well as Harrington, but it was months ago when we got the data on the 40% appeals.
Yes,
when are we going to get the new one?
So I don't know. I'll let you know when the next figures are. But let's just think about how this process is going, because the other thing you are aware of is that consequent upon the Harrington changes in particular, all the people doing these assessments started to take longer to do them to start with, right? They had to be taken offline to be trained, and secondly, they then took longer. Mm-hmm. So the time it took to do the assessments, I think, rose from memory from 50 minutes to 65 minutes originally, then it's gone back to 50. What that does is produce quite a big backlog of work, as you know, in the ATOS world. That means in turn that things are going to take a long time to sort of work their way through the system, so that you can then say of the October 2012 appeals data, oh, that's good, Harrington has now had an effect, because there's still quite a lot of things going through the system. This is, sadly, quite a long process. So please don't imagine simply because Harrington was in principle implemented in June 2011, today's appeals data is telling you that Harrington has been successful or otherwise, because my expectation is actually there's quite a lot of stuff in the system which needs to go through. Now, it's a perfectly fair challenge to say, well, when am I going to know that? But when I gave you my answer earlier about my current difficulty in connecting these data sets together to give me decent MI, I've asked the people who are good at connecting data together to see what they can do to actually produce much better information, so that we know when we look at a cohort of information about appeals successes, which months we're actually talking about in terms of whether they were pre or post Harrington. Otherwise we'll be lost.
I understand that, and thank you for that comprehensive answer. But can you give the committee any indication, even if it's within the different cohorts, with the splits the way you're talking about, which I do understand, and it's a point well made. I'm not entirely sure the media will understand it and others, but there you go. Can you give the committee some indication when we will get those next cohorts figures, because we haven't had any stats?
Well, you have no cohort. You have no cohort figures at the moment. All you have is the observable decisions of tribunals in individual months. Okay, so if I had the figures today of what the tribunal has done in October, it'll be a mixture of cases that were pre-Harrington and cases that were post-Harrington. So the best answer I can give you is to say, actually, that will remain the case for a long time. Much better that you ask me to go away and see, can I possibly string these data sets together? Because on the face of it, presumably everybody's got a national insurance number. It ought to be able to do a little bit of imaginative work here, but it's more complicated than it looks, and they are trying to do that. So we established an appeals task force with the Courts Tribunal Service, precisely to try to get behind what are all the different data sets, so that we can start to answer these questions. And I know it's unsatisfactory not to know the answer, but we are on the case of trying to find out.
But one of the reasons there are far fewer appeals for DLE is because the forum says don't provide any medical evidence, we will ask for it, we will get it ourselves if we need it. The problem with the WCA is that the individual doesn't know what it is that the assessor is going to need, so they don't know what evidence they should get in order to turn up for the WCA. Whereas if it ends up at appeal, of course they're going to throw everything into the appeal. And perhaps that might be part of the answer that you need to look at, is what is educating, or is in fact is getting the information after the WCA before the final ATOS thing is written, that they then source the medical evidence.
That's not, to my knowledge, something that the good professor has observed as being a critical step. Because I think in part...
Well, it was you that said that the problem was that they were turning up with new information at the appeal stage. So there has to be something fundamentally wrong at an earlier stage if this is the first time they've seen it, and it was crucial to the decision making. And it must be the way that
and it pre-existed the tribunal.
And well, and part of the problem is the cost as well. Under DLA, the cost falls to the department. Under WCA, it falls to the claimant. If you've got someone who's on very low income, and will be on very low income, clearly got a very clear disability, they will think that it will be obvious when they turn up to the WCA, and it's not. It's not turning out to be obvious. They didn't think they would need a consultant's letter to say that they're quadriplegic, but yet they are, and it's only at the tribunal that's coming out. My own welfare rights people in Aberdeen tell me that they've got a 90% success rate appeal. Now that's partly because they sort out the things they don't have much chance. They're getting people who are coming with nothing, no points at all, and are getting through quite easily on the appeal. So there is certainly something that's fundamentally wrong with the way that the WCA is collecting information and then doing the assessment.
So all I can come back to is that, to repeat what I've said previously, even Professor Harrington thinks it's the right test. Okay, it's absolutely critical that we get the right information with which to then do that assessment. The steps we put in respect of the sort of things he recommended it being done from June 11 for the doctors, for the healthcare professionals to make a personalised statement, starts to make it clear to people why the decision may have been made. Introducing mandatory reconsideration means that actually if people think there is something else going on, they get a chance to talk about it. Hearing from the tribunals how they can make a different decision on the same facts will help. So all the right sorts of things are happening to try to get behind why we're in the position that we find ourselves with so many bills being overtaken, being changed. And all I can say is that the tracking that through the system is a thing which I, in preparing for this, have myself put some welly behind to try to make sure we get that done properly. And
I do hear and agree with you, actually, that I think a lot of the right things are doing, but I'm not sure until I see the data. Let me ask one more question.
Me neither.
All of us. Let me ask one more question on ESA, and then, Sheriff, I pass you on the ATOS thing. Happy for you to do that bit. We are all well aware of constituents who are claiming ESA appear to be called back for reassessments very soon after a successful appeal. It doesn't leave anything to imagination how absolutely blindingly frustrating and chilling that can be, because it can literally be within, in my own case, with some constituents within 2 or 3 months after they've waited 8 months to go to an appeal, and then they're called straight back for a reassessment even though they won the appeal. What are you doing to ensure, or what are the department doing to ensure that the frequency of reassessments is just, it says here more appropriate, I would say more sensible? Is there any sort of thinking through about that?
Well, if the... I just want to make sure I've got the problem straight. If there had not been an appeal and we put somebody, for example, into the work-related activity group, we would routinely expect to then see that person again, because that's the way the system works.
But it says within a year, but it often goes back to when the whole appeal began, so it can then be 3 months after I've won my appeal.
So the original decision post appeal was wrong.
According to the tribunal.
According to the tribunal. I guess the question then is actually one that says, well, if time has elapsed, what would you like it to be? Would you prefer it to be the case that if you've gone to the trouble of an appeal?
I would do it from the day of successful tribunal appeal,
Yes.
because then it's a year. That's how people think.
But the year is. Let's be clear. The year is not some administrative convenience. The year is supposed to be what the healthcare professional making the assessment thought was the point at which the condition might have changed.
Yes.
Now, they may have got the wrong
wrong.
answer originally, but they may still be right on that. So
Well,
I mean, it's at least arguable that simply adding a year doesn't, is sort of, it's administratively convenient, but sort of isn't sensible. But I hear what you say. Let me go and have a think.
Please do, because I'm sure you can appreciate how you would feel if you were in that
I have
situation.
to say that the previous Minister, Chris Grayling, said on the Panorama programme that I'm sure you saw that was ridiculous and there were changes being made, but we've found no evidence that any changes have been made, because it's certainly still happening.
Let me check. Okay.
So we get the real power in front of us, we get the permanent secretary.
You know how it works.
But that if you listen to any of the debates, that caused more angst and anger than somebody with Parkinson's disease who's had to fight to get even their ag group or the support group, and then they've got a degenerative disease, and then 2 months later they're back on the treadmill again, and they've to
it is almost, even though I appreciate bureaucratic and I don't see it as some giant conspiracy, but it does not take any imagination at all to think about how I would feel, say, in that situation. I'd gone through all this, won the tribunal, and then 2 months later I get a letter. I would think that is personal, and that wouldn't be me being irrational, even though I know it's not. So
okay, but I mean, at the risk of I should have gracefully withdrawn. But we're spending a lot of money on this benefit, right? It's taxpayers' money. So I mean, if your request is, in the event that the state ends up going through a process which they believe to be true and a tribunal overturns it, then in all circumstances you will have a year on that benefit before we come back to it. Then I understand why you asked me that question. You'll understand why I at least promised to go in and think about it rather than say yes immediately, because it's not self-evident that that's the best way to protect taxpayers' money.
I know you'll go away and think about it, and I'm sure come back with something sensible.
Okay, can I very quickly ask a few questions, and this will be the last, about the contract between yourselves and Atos for the delivery of the WCA. The NAO highlighted that even though Atos didn't meet some of its targets 9 times out of 10, you didn't apply any financial penalties, which were already written in the contract.
So,
why not?
I think this is a quite misleading statistic. Can I explain why? The way the contract is structured, we are trying to get the contractor to deliver good performance month in, month out. In all honesty, if they're going to not meet the performance in 1 month, I'm most interested in making sure that actually they recover that and put it back again. So the way the contract is structured, and you and I may both wonder why it was structured this way, the way it is structured...
Well, the thing is, a part of our problem is we don't really know how it's structured, because any time we ask the questions, we always come up with, well, that's commercially confidential.
Well, I don't think this bit is commercially confidential, because I won't possibly be able to defend the question you've asked me unless I explain it. So, in respect of one element of this, a failure in 1 month, as it were, acts for us to say to the contractor, look, unless this is remedied, we would be making a sort of a charge against you. But actually, if you do remedy it in the course of the next 3 months, if you hit the performance in the next 3 months and put right what went wrong, then actually we won't be putting that additional charge against you, because at the end of the day, taking 1 month with another, I just want performance, right? That's what I really want. So what the National Audit Office is saying is, well, the very fact that you actually observed that performance in 1 month wasn't quite right, they are then observing, well, it's actually because they've, as it were, earned back that particular thing, only 1 in 10 is actually sticking. But actually, that is to misunderstand the nature of the contractual provision which actually that was put in place.
So what would Atos have to do to get a penalty from you?
So
what kind of things would they have to get wrong for them to incur a penalty?
So the contract contains clauses which I will go and check to the extent to which this is commercially confidential. If the quantum of all of those payments which I'm explaining can be earned back rises to too high a level, then they're clearly at risk of being in default of the contract. But can I come
Okay,
back?
they're meant to be doing 11,000 WCAs a week. Are they?
Well, the total flow into them from ESA and RB is about 130,000 a month. So I'm trying to. So it's a WC.
Well, that's a lot more than 11,000.
No, but you mean the face-to-face bit then, do you?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, they are, yes. But let me come back to some observations.
Well, my understanding is they're sending out 1,000 letters a month, 11,000 letters a week, but actually they're not doing 11,000 face-to-faces, and there's a big backlog.
There is indeed. So
does that incur a penalty?
Well, okay. So I hesitate to do it this way around, but let me be clear. In any contractual arrangement, penalties depend a little bit on actually what both parties are doing. So if the government decides on the back of Harrington to change what they require of the contractor, and it starts to take 65 minutes, not 50 minutes, and require the entire healthcare professionals to be retrained, then the backlog in the first instance is a consequence of the evolving nature of the test, and it's not on the face of it immediately an immediate shortfall on Atos's part. Right? So the number of factors here, one is the test has been evolving, and the consequence of an evolving test is you lose time and you then find you're unfamiliar with a new thing and it takes a while to do it. Secondly, the department itself projects for Atos how many ESA claims there may be. This is not a straightforward process, and recently we have underestimated the number of ESA claims that have come. So both of those things, on the face of it, contributing to the backlog, are potentially to do with the department. The third one is back in Atos's territory, which is that they do need to recruit enough people and keep them trained and not have high turnover, which is to do with their position on this. And that in turn, fourthly, is not unconnected with just the public coverage of all of this, because if actually you wanted to recruit and retain people, you don't want to find that actually you're constantly in the news. So we have four factors going on here. Now, you will find under contract law that actually any lawyer who looks at that will say, well, hang on a minute, so what are the salient features in that? How will I actually manage the contract? And realistically, we are managing this contract to take account of what they have done that they shouldn't have done, and what we have done, which has actually changed the game. So that's the nature of the conversation that's going on, and it's a mistake, I think, to say backlog equals Atos failure equals why I penalise them.
I understand that, but then what I might float up is why have fixed agreed targets if 9 times out of 10 there are not going to be any financial penalties? So that's one question. The second thing is I just had an absolute brainwave as you were talking.
Great.
And that is I've worked out how I'm absolutely certain you will reduce the number of appeals, improve Atos's reputation, which is important because of what we're trying to achieve with helping get people back to work, and that is that you set them a target based on the number of successful appeals. And if they get X amount of successful appeals against them, they lose money. If they get Y amount of unsuccessful appeals, they gain money. I absolutely guarantee you, as a good, solid liberal capitalist, that will improve the figures.
Okay.
Getting it right first time.
Yes, funny, we could use that.
But not in a world where your already chair has been asking me to let my decision makers to have more discretion about whether they take their advice. Okay, so I mean, when people go to appeal, it's a combination of a process all the way from the moment they ring a member of staff to make a claim, through the bit we ask Atos to do, through the bit we ask the decision makers to do. I agree with you. In principle, the best way to optimise the system, both for DWP staff and Atos together, would be to minimise those appeals. That was a very sensible thing to do. But I do need to understand.
There could be an element of that. There's probably about 20 people in every constituency who get 0 points at the Atos assessment and end up getting put into the support group. Now that's a huge discrepancy, not into their group, into the support group. So that surely would illustrate that perhaps they're not doing particularly well. There's no penalties for failure as far as we can see in this contract.
So the contract we have has got measures of quality, which I've described previously. Has the test been done properly, or actually people are going back and retesting what's going on here, and we've tested that, as well as measures of quantity. Right now, the question started with this is an outrage, they've got all these backlogs, okay? I've tried to explain why the backlogs may not themselves be to do with Atos. Now, if you jump ship and then say, well, hang on a minute, though, the decisions at the end of the day are about quality, not about quantity, well, that's a different argument, and I agree with you. But as things stand, I have a contract that was signed in 2005, well before I arrived, which has a certain contractual structure to it. If you're encouraging me to think laterally about whether that contract might actually be revisited, then you won't be the first to suggest that.
But, well, indeed, but you do have a new contract coming up with the new PIP, and you're going to Atos.
And tell me you're being flexible.
So you would imagine that we might have learned some lessons in the way we're constructing that contract.
But it's interesting what you said, that one of the difficulties that Atos have is because of the negative publicity, they have difficulty in recruiting and retaining staff. But you've just given them 2/3 of the mainland GB contracts to Atos.
Yeah. Okay, so
they're having to subcontract to Lanarkshire Health Board.
So before we went down the personal independence payment, we had a really quite good piece of work done externally about the nature of the healthcare professional market, their propensity to want to work for us, and the nature of the test we're doing. So the PIP assessment is different in nature from the WCA assessment. One's testing functional capability, one's assessing the extent to which the disability affects your life. It is genuinely our view that there are more healthcare professionals that will be available and competent to do that second test, the PIP one, than has been the case for WCA. And more particularly, it remains the case that the evidence we have is there's a lot more people in the healthcare world who are prepared to do sessional work than Atos has to date made use of. So, for example, all the nurses that Atos uses are employed by Atos. That's not the same as the number of nurses that might be prepared to do 1 or 2 sessions in addition to their day job in a hospital. And so the evidence of looking at the market, this is self-declarations, they've been to doctors, they've been to OTs, they've been to all kinds of people. How would you feel about doing this sort of work? I don't think there's any doubt that in the PIP assessment we should be able to find a deep enough labour market not to have some of the constraints which Atos has found themselves.
All that's very well if you were just doing the PIP, or indeed if you were just doing the WCA, but you're going to have them both together at the same time as also introducing universal credit.
But again, let's stick to
huge numbers of face-to-face.
Let's do some facts here, though. There has been a problem for backlog reasons I've explained with where this has got to. But as we stand now, of the 7 groups of geographical areas, 2 of those groups are now actually within the normal sort of tolerance for backlogs, so they have enough staff already. 2 more are likely to be so before Christmas. The average across the country is probably likely to be back on track by the end of November. So bit by bit, Atos do have enough people to do the test as it currently stands within the prescribed time limit.
Right.
They're working through a backlog, which is a historic problem, which takes a while to get through.
Have you got those figures? Because we haven't been able to find out actually the number of face-to-face interviews. Because I've certainly got one constituent, I don't know how widespread it is, who have been put onto the RAG group before they've actually gone through the WCA.
So
that's an IB reassessment.
So I'm talking to you about the total number of assessments, whether they go to face-to-face or not, whether it's ESA or IBR, against a metric that says we expect you to, on average, deliver your reports back within 35 days. Two parts of the country are already doing that now. 2 more will be before Christmas. So your concern that you started with, which was that there are not enough professionals to go round, would not be borne out by those facts.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you're going to have to be doing up to anything more, probably more than 100,000 face-to-face interviews a month. Once the two come in and stream, it'll be more than that.
But as I've explained, because actually the 2 things that will be an addition that will enable us to have a bigger market is that the PIP assessment will enable me to use more healthcare professionals that are currently not being used under Atos, right? So in particular occupational therapists, and secondly the contractors, by making better use of sessional work, tapping up people that will do a little bit of work on the side rather than insisting on employing them, we'll find there's more than enough people who are prepared to do this, and even at the sort of prices that we're talking about, because they actually asked questions about price as well. So it was quite a sophisticated piece of work. So I'm not sitting here thinking that because I have extant backlogs and ATOS, it demonstrates there aren't enough healthcare professionals to do both the WCA and PIP in future, and that's not the case.
And will there be something in the PIP contract that actually gives a payment by results? In other words, they don't get payment by volume, but about getting the assessment right first time.
I don't know the answer to the question, but I'll go and check for you.
Okay.
And equally, forgive me, Chair, you did mention quite rightly that we were dealing with an old contract from 2005. I would also welcome a little briefing from your department about how the new contract with PIPs actually shows the more sensible, flexible sort of learning process that the department's been through the last few years. I'd welcome that.
Very happy to send you that.
And on ATOS, there's a contract review going on at the moment as well.
Sorry, I didn't hear
on
that.
ATOS, there is a contract review going on at the moment.
It was originally up for replacement, was it 2013, but it's been extended, is that but surely if it was extended, that would have been the opportunity to perhaps take a longer look at it.
So, in the real world, if you're sitting on a large backlog you're trying to get rid of, it's not an easy contract to have any leverage over.
I'm sure ATOS don't think it's an easy contract either.
No, well they don't. So I mean, but simply to say, well, surely we could have just got somebody else to do it immediately. Just think about what a potential bidder would look at. I mean, they'd want whatever the current situation is, and I've explained why the backlog is the way it is, to have been sort of put back in its box before they'd want to take it on. So we've gone to a different contract structure for PIP, which does have, it's not a national contract, as you know, it's in different lots. It's got different sorts of things in it. I'm very happy to write Mr. Lord a note to explain what we've learned.
But we're still struggling because the question you couldn't answer was about the statistics for the IB reassessments and the volumes of that and the outcomes.
So I'm not clear what the question. Just repeat what it is, and I'll get it right for you.
Stephen asked you a question about the statistic release for those who are presently were on IB and have been migrated to ESA.
Yeah.
The July statistics were pooled. We haven't got any statistics on volumes or indeed the outcomes since I think way back in March. The March was the last set. And without that,
I remember that, yes.
We can't actually make the judgment as to whether what you're saying is accurate or not, because we don't have any of the stats.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, well,
I'm sorry about that.
And I thank you very much for coming. It was meant to be a bit quicker than this, but it always seems to happen when it's a Monday and we're not up against the sitting of the House. So, but I thank you very much for coming along and for giving us your time this afternoon.
Not at all. Thank you very much.